clicking the blue Go Live button. And we're live. It is Friday, January 7th, 2022, 5 o'clock p.m. And I am going to dispense with the banter this evening because our guest, Molly Ball, has to leave at 5:45, and so I don't want we can defer the banter till after she's gone. We are not allowed to have fun anymore, but we are allowed to have Molly Ball of Time Magazine, who has written, and she reminds me that she actually wrote back in August a remarkable profile of Michael Fanone, who is the officer who of the DC police who has been most vocal about matters related to the January 6th uprising or insurrection or riot, whatever your preferred term is. She recently wrote a Twitter thread kind of re-upping the whole thing. And Molly, welcome to the show. And
Thank you.
Get us started. Walk us through this story a little bit. It's not the story about Michael Fanone that I thought we knew, and so I'm curious for your sort of account of what he went through, not on the day, which we know, but in the months following January 6th.
Yeah, our cover line for this piece, and thank you so much for having me, and it's particularly to discuss this piece, which I care a lot about. Our cover line for this story was the aftermath, because it really is much more a story about what happened after January 6th, right? The narrative making, the history shaping, or lack thereof, or distortion thereof, that occurred that prompted me to write this. So maybe the best way to get into it is for me to sort of tell the story of how I came to the story, how I came to write it.
Yep.
Which is that, in the days after January 6th, I was very shaken up, like a lot of people. And there was this great story in the Washington Post about by their terrific police reporter, Peter Herman, about the cops who defended the Capitol. And then a couple days later, I saw a few of them on TV. Fanone was one of them. Daniel Hodges was one of them. And I think it was at a time when people, myself included, sort of needed that emotional uplift of feeling like there was a hero in this situation. There was someone we could be grateful for, who had sort of been responsible for helping save democracy. And then a few months later, I saw him on Don Lemon. There was a segment that went viral. Started trying to reach out to him, eventually made contact, and had a series of conversations, a series of interviews, and just sort of on paper, it looked like a great story, right? Here's a guy who voted for Trump, calls himself a redneck, has a very sort of rural accent, a drawl, and it was just this incredible irony on its face that he would be beaten within an inch of his life, literally by a thin blue line flagpole, right? And by a crowd chanting USA, and people who, as we know, thought that they were acting as patriots, acting in defense of their country, not the opposite. And so, at the time that I got to know Mike, he was still on medical leave from the Metropolitan Police Department. He was, suffering from PTSD, as I wrote in the piece, still living with his mom, going to a lot of doctor's appointments. But what I found out was that he when he started showing up in Congress, right, he went to lobby to try to meet some of the Republicans who were voting against the gold medals, for the officers who defended the Capitol. And there were a couple of high-profile incidents, for example, when Congressman Clyde refused to shake his hand. So he was becoming increasingly visible. And as I got to know him, I sort of discovered the complexity of his story and the thoughtfulness and the journey that he was on. I sort of caught him in the middle of this journey of realization that he was having. And I think, you know, as a political reporter, it was a little bit similar to the journey that a lot of my friends, particularly on the right, have been on in the Trump era, a real struggle with his own identity and figuring out how he could square the person he thought he was, a policeman through and through, with the role in which he'd been cast and the distortions that Trump had wrought. So so the real sort of emotional core of the piece, it was about the way that, you know, we were all being sort of, I'm tired of this term, but gaslit about what had really happened on January 6th. And there was this, and there still is this real war, this real struggle going on to define what it was that had happened and what it meant. But also, it really resonated with me as someone who has been following and been interested in the debates over policing in this country and the protests of 2020 and the debate that we've been having for years in this country about public safety. And he was caught in the middle of both of those. You know, he voted for Trump in 2016 because for many years he had felt like police were being demonized, and he particularly blamed Democrats and the left for this, for sort of politicizing the police and putting them in the middle of a polarized debate, particularly about race. And so he was on this journey of sort of reconsidering everything he thought he knew and everything that he thought he was. And that's what I hope to be able to capture in the piece, in addition to just telling the story of January 6th in a way that I hoped would allow people to grapple with the seriousness of it and the consequences of it on a human level, as well as on a, you know, national and political and constitutional level.
So it's an incredible piece. I came to it late, and I somehow missed it when I did not in any sense miss his testimony, but I missed this piece when you wrote it. And this is a good argument to all of you out there. Do Twitter threads about your past work, because sometimes in the rush of things that go on, you know, people miss things that they actually would want to read. And I really appreciated the opportunity to come back and revisit this, and actually didn't notice that it was from August when I reread it. I thought you were sort of doing
it's just that fresh, you know. It just stands the test of time that well.
Yes. So I want to ask you about the trajectory that he was on, because I feel like at some level it tracks the experience of a lot of Never Trump conservatives, as you that there's a moment where they were, you know, beaten with thin blue line flagpoles in a metaphorical sense, and of course him it's in a literal sense, and some of them decide, like Lindsey Graham, decide that actually they deserve it and that's okay, and that's the sort of Lindsey Graham, Ted Cruz, Mitch McConnell experience. And some of them actually go through this process of revisiting a lot of assumptions that they had made. I look at his story and I say, if I were a Republican member of Congress, what on earth would possess me not to shake the hand of a person who is ideologically sympathetic, who looks like me, sounds like me, and by the way, help protect my life. And so I am curious about how he came to be PNG'd. He hadn't, this was long before he had allied himself with Benny Thompson and Liz Cheney and given that table stomp thumping testimony. Why is it and how is it that he came to be identified as part of the problem from the point of view of Republican members whose lives he had helped protect?
Well, the short answer is he refused to shut up. He's a stubborn person, a strong-willed person, a person who insisted on having his voice heard, and in part it was a way of dealing with trauma. He was severely physically and mentally traumatized. He suffered a minor heart attack.
For people who don't remember this, this is the guy who people.
I wish I had the magazine
was
here.
tased,
hold it up,
and said people were standing there shouting, "Kill him with his own gun!" Right? He really thought he was going to die in that period of time, and ends up telling somebody, "I have kids." I mean, there was a real. This is not trauma light. Let's this is the real deal.
Yeah, I mean, I think you could argue that he suffered the most severe non-lethal injuries of any officer who responded that day out of the hundreds who did, and many of them were severely injured. But he did come within an inch of his life. He was as I wrote in the piece, a plainclothes narcotics officer, rank and file officer, and so he didn't have to be there that day. There was an all call that went out as he actually went into work early because he heard this call to the Capitol. And, there'd been intelligence percolating. There was a sense in advance that things could get ugly. He drove in, he lives outside the Beltway in Alexandria. He drove in early, met his partner at the station. He literally never put on this uniform before because he worked plainclothes. What he had planned to be doing that day was to meet up with his favorite informant, this elderly Black transgender woman named Leslie, who was a very close friend of his, who actually has sadly died in the time since. And they were going to make a heroin buy in the projects. And that was how he usually spent his days. He was, doing high-level trafficking work and working with federal agencies and so on. But it was very far from crowd control and very far from the Capitol, although he did do a brief stint as a Capitol police officer in the beginning of his career 20 years ago. So he voluntarily, he and his partner, Jimmy Albright, self-deployed to the Capitol, responding to that call. Not everybody did. He later became a little bit bitter about the fact that, this is a 3,000 plus officer department. The call went out for everyone who could to respond to the Capitol, but it was about 850 officers who chose to do so. This is the Metropolitan Police Department that patrols Washington, D.C., which is a separate entity from the Capitol Police, who patrols specifically the Capitol grounds. And so he and Jimmy walked into the Capitol as the riot was already well underway. They heard an officer in distress call. They went to the West Front, which we now know was what was sort of the last line of defense for the Capitol. This was the door of the building that most directly faced the White House, where the rioters were coming from. And it was the central door, the door that, that the president walks out to get inaugurated. And it was crucially also an unfortified door. So the glass was broken very quickly. And so, when they got there, this battle was well underway, and it was just hand-to-hand combat. There was really not anything sort of organized about it. It was just officers standing shoulder to shoulder, riot shields up, trying to block this entrance and push back this sea of thousands and thousands of people. At one point, he said it reminded him of the movie 300, except without the six-pack abs. So it was very intense. Clouds of tear gas, the floor slick with vomit, people getting injured and passing out and replacing each other to try to hold the line. So he and his partner Jimmy got to the front of the line. And Jimmy looked away for a moment to grab a knife from someone who was wielding one. When he looked back, Mike had been dragged into the crowd, and that was when he was beaten, he was tased, he was dragged down those marble steps of the Capitol head first, and face first, and he heard the rioters around him saying, get his gun, kill him with his own gun. And at that moment, he thought, should I draw my gun? And as he's recounted his thought process subsequently, what he thought was, I would be justified in doing that legally, in using force, but then what would happen? I would probably die, and a lot of people would probably die. And so the only thing he could think of was to,
with the thought being that the second that the gun is into play,
someone else fires the gun,
like gets out of,
and
it just gets out of control.
Exactly.
Right. Okay.
Exactly.
I just want to like make sure that I'm like,
yeah, that's exactly right. Good question. And so the only thing he could think of in that moment of sort of panic, again, as he's screaming from this taser at the base of his neck and suffering a heart attack in the process, the only thing he could think of was to appeal to any humanity that these people might have. And so he sort of whimpered, I've got kids. And that was when, most of the rioters continued to try to beat him, but a couple of them appeared to hear him. They sort of pushed the rest of the crowd away. They surrounded him and picked him up and sort of dragged him. He was half unconscious at this point. They pulled him back to that line at the door, and he was pulled back behind the line. He lost consciousness for several minutes. Jimmy ran back with him, terrified that he wasn't going to make it, and trying to bring him back, reminding him that they had plans to go duck hunting. Come on, buddy, stay in there, stay with me. And this is all on videotape, and it's chilling to watch.
And he has said, and I think this is one of the most interesting emotional responses that he has, that his reaction to the two people who helped him out was, oh my God, thank you. Internally, what he was feeling was, oh my God, thank you so much, and fuck you for being here. And I thought that kind of captures this this transition that he is beginning to go through.
Yeah, I think that's right. That's sort of the moment. Thank you, but fuck you for being there. And because there were sort of two transitions for him, right? And they're both, the where you were talking earlier about the parallel with the Never Trumpers. It's when you realize that the people you thought were your friends aren't your friends when the going gets tough, right? And so the first moment,
and that they actually want to kill you.
Yeah, I was like, that's what I was gonna say. Like, I don't think it's like the going gets tough. They're making the tough. Like, they're the ones that are like,
they've turned against you very actively and are trying to kill you. Correct.
Yeah, it's not like they abandon you when we're
trying to kill you.
Yeah, exactly.
Good point.
Yeah, but I think that that's much more profound. Yeah. It's not like a passiveness. Like that's the opposite of that. Like, I mean, it is both an act of aggression to like have started this and have shown up that day, an act of aggression to specifically attack him, and then an act of but still an action and not passive, to have the presence of mind to try to save him. But all of that is a complication that is not about like the circumstances. Like, none of this is circumstances. These are all created events. Like, this is like, they're like, none of this is having to happen. And it actually reminds me almost like of the start of a Stockholm syndrome type of feeling, which is just like being grateful that your captors give you food, but like also fuck you for kidnapping me. Like, there's like, it's like the same type of psychological kind of back layer, I think, to that. But I'm going to drop out. Scott, go ahead. By the way, have you met Scott? Scott is our other co-host. He would join a little late.
Hello.
But yeah.
Hello. Yeah. Although as I pointed out in the chat, I still get paid. First of all, I started reading it right before we jumped on. It's really beautifully and powerfully written. So congratulations on that.
And for those who don't know this about Molly also has written a fascinating biography of Nancy Pelosi, and a lot of other things that you should read. So, start with this piece, but Molly has done a lot of work that is worth your time.
I've
Thank
seen
you.
your byline for a long time. I'm a big fan. So
Thank you.
Yeah. Okay. One of the so you actually had a link to the footage. So I spent most of my time actually watching the footage right before this, and I was struck by two things. One was just, how violent it is, how it was, and how that, I don't think of it as being so violent, as more almost comical, but the footage shows how unbelievably violent and brutish it is. And I was wondering how this plays a role in his story of the article, but that Trump is really inciting them. If you go to if I went to a rally of somebody I supported and they're telling me they stole the election, I would be really upset. And then, people say, let's go to the Capitol. I guess I would run to the Capitol. I hadn't realized how much incitement and explicitness. I somehow imagined that the President of the United States would have, kind of insinuated that
he
there
literally
was
said, let's
Right.
go and I will go with you.
Right, exactly.
Which shockingly, the former president said something that was not true in that moment. He did not walk to the Capitol.
He said he would go with
But
them.
he did say he would go with them.
But then then there's this. It's actually a
I
fascinating
mean, he had an
speech.
excuse. He dodged it because of flat feet. So they wrote him a note,
Right.
and
Oh,
he didn't
God,
have
yeah.
to.
No, but it's actually a fascinating speech from an incitement point of view. So he says, Molly is correct. He says, we're going to go, and there's a pause, and then he sort of shouts to the Capitol, right, in this way that is quite violent. And then he says, and I will go with you, which is false. I will be with you. And then there's this other pause. And then he says, to cheer on our courageous legislators for their courage, which is, obviously ironic. But some of them we won't be cheering for. So he actually, if you read the sentence, it is not anywhere near the legal definition of incitement, right? He says, we're going to go to the Capitol and I'm going to go with you and we're going to cheer on our legislators, and some of them we won't be cheering for. But if you hear it and you're in the state of mind that Scott is in describing, I can totally understand. And you think that Trump is there with you and he's called on you to do this. And then there are these assholes who are standing in your way, preventing you from doing what the President of the United States demanded that you do.
And he's being quite emphatic. He says, there's been massive fraud, not like a little fraud, not like our data guys think that there are anomalies. He is saying we won by a landslide.
And the other side knows it.
Right, and he thinks the whole idea is stop the steal. They're stealing it from us. I had almost, sympathy would be too strong of a word, but I got it. Why these people had stormed the Capitol. It seemed like, of course, the thing to do. And so, so much about Trump is so outside the norms of human behavior that it's hard to remember how irresponsible and malevolent the man is.
Can I ask a really quick kind of follow-up or kind of observation, but a question kind of tailing on to Scott's observation, which is just do you remember this? What do you remember of January 6th, Molly? Where were you? What was your relationship with this story? I feel it's not, we've talked about this at the time because we had the show that day, and I actually was sitting in a totally different location because I was trying to be in front of a TV because I was watching it all happen still, and I was just in shock. And I had been like on the phone for 2 hours, like just blabbing with a friend and like doing on a walk. And like all of a sudden she looked at a TV and was like, get to a TV. It looks like Benghazi at the Capitol. And that was like basically like what happened. And then like I watched from then on. But yeah, I'm just curious what your story is with it.
Yeah, I mean, I've obviously spent a lot of time in the Capitol. I was not there that day. I'll always remember that it happened on a Wednesday because Wednesdays are when we generally close the magazine. So I was actually working on a piece that week, sort of bidding farewell to Trump. And the angle was the damage he'd done to the Republican Party. And so it was tying together the Georgia runoffs, which had just been resolved, just concluded, and the fact and the loss of the presidency and everything else. So we ended up recasting that piece, but on a tight schedule. But so I was watching it on television, and I watched the speech, and it is a very striking speech to go back and watch. But I was struck by it even at the time, how aggressive it was. But you know, it wasn't the first time that he had laid down a marker on this particular date. In fact, I had another piece that I was working on that was sort of about the defense of the election. We didn't run that before January 6th, in part because we wanted to make sure that that milestone passed without incident before we asserted that the election had been saved. So I was also watching it unfold from home on TV with great alarm, and hearing from a lot of people that I knew who were either there or who had connections to the building.
I was literally recording Rational Security with Shane Harris and my wife and Susan Hennessy, and it happened, and we just reacted. Like, our reactions are like on Rational Security in real time. So I want to, before we go to audience questions, and I want to be, I know you have a brief time. I just want to ask you, I mean, he is now working for CNN. He's left the police department. Where is he now in that political evolution with respect to his former community?
Well, you know, he voted for Trump in 2016, but he always considered himself sort of independent and apolitical, and really just not interested in politics. I think, like a lot of normal Americans, he sort of looks at it like the Olympics. Every 4 years you notice it and then it goes away. Maybe a little more annoying than the Olympics, depending on how you feel about figure skating, I guess. So he says that, you know, he started to he soured on Trump, he says, pretty much immediately, especially because of the effect that he saw Trump having on his fellow police officers. You know, the guys around him were just so bitter and angry all the time, and Trump was just getting them riled up, you know, and saying these things about Blue Lives Matter and embracing the police that were, you know, transparently self-serving for Trump, transparently a bid for votes, at least to Mike, but so many police officers and others in law enforcement and the military were so captivated by, I think, the combination of lip service and machismo that Trump sort of represented. And so Mike didn't like a lot of that stuff. And so he soured on Trump pretty quickly. And he did vote for Biden in 2020. He particularly was moved to do so because of the time that Joe Biden attended the funerals of the cops who were murdered in New York City several years ago. So he saw Biden as a Democrat who was pro-police, which I think his career has been a theme. But so to go back to sort of the evolution that he's had, you know, I talked about this in the piece and also in my thread yesterday. His real alienation has been, you know, because his tribe wasn't the Republican Party, his tribe was law enforcement,
Right.
And that has been the real difficult alienation that he's wrestled with. That is the tribe that he has found himself sort of forcibly expelled from in a very disturbing and difficult and traumatic way.
So walk us through that, because that to me is the most shocking thing in the article.
Yeah. Well, when Fanone started speaking out, he started to get grief for it, and at first it was just sort of like, well, the sort of policeman's code. You don't put yourself out there. We're not heroes. We're just doing a job. But it was clearly more than that. It was about Trump, and it was about the fact that he was speaking specifically against, blaming Trump for what happened, and calling out the Republicans trying to whitewash what happened. And so it was. I think the first moment that really hit home was when there was a Metropolitan Police detective assigned to investigate the assault on him, and he found out that detective had been posting nasty things about Mike, about Officer Fanone on social media, calling him names, saying that he was a buffoon, calling him an egomaniac, and so he complained to a supervisor, like, hey, how is this guy supposed to investigate my case, right? This is, and they said, oh, don't worry about it. He's just got an opinion. And so he kept complaining, and the guy was eventually taken off the case, and his assault has been since then exclusively handled by the FBI. It was taken out of the Metropolitan Police Department's hands. But that was the beginning of a phenomenon that really became pervasive. And as he became more visible, there was more and more sort of chatter. He was in the hospital for 3 days, recuperating from his injuries before he could go home, and then for months afterwards in physical and emotional therapy. But it was when he testified before Congress. It was when he started appearing on TV and visiting the Capitol to try to meet with these Republicans. But especially when he testified in late July, these guys who never called or texted when he was in the hospital started sending him these mocking memes from cop forums, or these articles in right-wing media calling him an actor and a fake, and questioning whether he was even a cop at all or telling the truth. And so people are sending him all this hateful crap. And I think, and that was when he sort of realized that he was no longer welcome. And when he wanted to go back to work, he was finally cleared to return to duty in September. So this is after my article came out, and I'm sure being on the cover of Time magazine really helped. but it was in this whole process that he started out on a mission to speak up. Ironically, he felt that he was speaking up on behalf of the police. He believed, because it was when he was lying in his hospital bed watching CNN, and there were commentators saying, well, why weren't they making arrests? Why weren't there more cops there? Why wasn't there more of a stronger police presence to expel these rioters? And he got really pissed off. Like, how dare they question us? This is just more, liberal anti-police bullshit. So he picks up the phone, Googles CNN, calls the number, and the person who answers says, sir, this is the reception desk. But he wanted to call out what he saw as the liberals who were sort of sliming the police for doing their best on that day, and to explain what they had done and how hard they had worked to save the Capitol and protect it. And so and so that was his initial motivation. And it was gradually, as he started thinking more about it and seeing how it was received and watching this all play out, and watching how something that seemed so obvious in the moment, that seemed so obvious when he was there, when those Republican members of Congress were there fearing for their lives, we saw them make a lot of very different statements then than they're making today. Something that seemed so obvious in the moment was being turned around and turned on its head and twisted and distorted. And so first his mission was, well, I can't let them tell these lies. I have to correct the record. I've got it all on camera. It's on my body-worn camera. Once they see it, they can't deny it. And then it turned out they could still deny it. They could still question it. They could still lie about it. And as he thought more and more about it, and as he saw, his own tribe and law enforcement turn against him and choose, this is a little bit of a detour, but I've just always liked this metaphor. I remember being in Central Florida in September, October 2016, covering the Trump campaign. And it was right after Access Hollywood, right after Paul Ryan had disowned, had walked away from Trump to the extent that he did during the campaign. And so at this rally, here's Paul Ryan, the supposed golden boy of the Republican Party, all this stuff, former vice presidential nominee, but forced to choose between Trump and Paul Ryan. We all know how that went down. And what I wrote at the time was, it was as if there was an acrimonious divorce and the kids chose daddy, and they kept choosing daddy over and over again. And so that happened, and so that was also what happened. What he saw happen, they could choose between their friend or Trump, and they chose Trump. And so he gradually realized, and I think he said to me at one point, I know this sounds insane and narcissistic or whatever, but I really got this idea in my head that maybe I could be the one to get Trump out of all these people's heads, to try to finally, stamp out everything that Trump represented. So this mission that he was on sort of snowballed and continues. But so it was this series of realizations for him that he had sort of bitten off more than he expected.
Scott.
Just really, really briefly, I mean, the song, the revolution will not be televised. Well, my God, in the moment, everyone is like filming this, and of course he's got the body cam, and even the the guy who's investigating the assault is posting about this. It's like, we are like oversharing nation. I just want to. I mean, or in the footage, everyone's carrying their iPhone. It's like they're filming it and then sharing it. There's like no job even for the state to do. They just have lots of video to go through. Anyway, I just want to know how bizarre this is.
Richard, the floor is yours.
Hi, I have a couple of questions. Should I ask both of them?
Ask both of them.
Oh, okay. So first of all, I read the article and it was fascinating, and disturbing, and I guess the obvious reactions. But I was curious about if Fanone has any complaints about how outside the right-wing news sources, that the news media have been covering not only his but others' stories as well, and not to mention the coverage of the aftermath of January 6th.
I think at times he has been frustrated by feeling like he's being assigned a side when he doesn't see himself as taking a side and wanting to have a side, particularly when he has been put in this position of sort of speaking against Trump. The guy's still not a liberal. This is still a guy whose social life revolves around, hunting, fishing, and country music. Not that you can't be a liberal and do those things, but he is still very much, culturally and dispositionally, I think, conservative with a small c, not in the limited government sense, but just sort of in the cultural sense. And so he doesn't like the idea that suddenly he's this liberal crusader, and he still does want to speak up for the good name of policing when it's done well, and to push back against some of the negativity. He's tried repeatedly to build bridges with some of the DC Black Lives Matter activists to try to say, let's try to find places where we can collaborate and find common ground, and they've basically said fuck off. They are against the police. They want to abolish the police, and so they're not interested in even speaking to him. And he would like to believe that there's a world where we can all see each other as human beings and not take sides, but try to solve problems. And I know that sounds hokey and Pollyanna-ish, but I think if there's a frustration with the coverage, it's that it is so polarized and that he doesn't want to be seen as, and he doesn't want to feel used by the left any more than the right.
One of the lines in your article that struck me was you discussed the way that the Republicans wouldn't have anything to do with him for obvious reasons. The Democrats wouldn't have anything to do with him because of the whole police issue, which I found very disturbing, just because it, on both sides, it kind of it reflects an unwillingness to deal with some inconvenient facts. Anyway.
Yeah, sorry, go on.
No, go ahead.
Oh, I was just going to say, I don't want to draw an equivalence here. The Democrats, particularly in Congress, have been very good to him, and he's made a lot of friends. Interestingly, not just with Eric Swalwell and Nancy Pelosi, but with Ilhan Omar and many other Democratic members of Congress, as well as the Cheneys and Kinzingers of the world. I guess those are the only Cheneys and Kinzingers, unfortunately. But
there's two Cheneys.
That's true. But it is the case that he is not. I mean, you think of, like, for example, the way that the first responders were lifted up and embraced on both sides, but particularly by Republicans after 9/11. The Democrats have not exactly treated the cops that way, and he did get word that part of the reason was that particularly in urban politics, they did not want to be seen as too pro-police in this political climate.
And particularly pro this kind of police, right? The kind that does hunting, fishing, and country music.
Well, there were plenty of officers who there that day who don't look or sound like that, and they also didn't, and they didn't get awards either, is what I'm saying.
But to the extent that he's the face of it, or has become the face of it, he's the face of a kind of policing that a lot of liberals have. He is a bit of a cultural stereotype of a type that the liberal rejection of police is a very clear rejection of, and I think there's the fact that Black Lives Matter activists won't meet with him is a reflection of that.
Yes, but what I'm trying to say is, on the political level, there were white cops and black cops and all kinds of different cops there that day, and none of them got anything from the DC mayor's office until Fanone wouldn't shut up and sent a bunch of letters, and they invited them to an employee appreciation ceremony where, alongside, and this is nothing against sanitation workers who do a vital job, but maybe didn't put their lives on the line to save democracy this year. And so it was alongside the municipal workers who did a good job that the cops also got a sort of pat on the head from the DC mayor's office. And similarly, he sent a letter to the White House. Jen Psaki was asked about it in a briefing, said, I'll get back to you. And then 3 months passed. And then I started asking them about it. And the response from the White House press office was to say, well, Joe Biden loves the police. Look at all these dead cops he's said nice things about. And I said, well, what about this guy? And that was when he and his fellow officers got invited to the White House.
So, Richard, your second question very quickly, because I want Paula to get her question in before Molly has to go.
Great. So you also wrote that you didn't write it, but you noted the suicides of a couple of the police officers. I think since that article, now we have a total of 4 police officers who have committed suicide. And I was curious if you knew if they were dealing with similar frustrations about the reactions of their departments, of the FOP, Congress, and the White House.
Yeah, I don't want to speak to that directly because I don't have direct knowledge or my own reporting on that. I have seen some reporting to that effect. I do remember, a couple days after Mike testified before Congress and before my story had come out, getting a text from him at about 11 o'clock at night because he had just found out that another MPD officer who was there on January 6th, someone that he had known for many years, had committed suicide. And that, I believe, that was Gunther Hashida, who I believe was number 4. This is this cognitive dissonance, this identity struggle that these cops are going through. It's rough.
Paula, you get the last question today.
Thank you. So my question is one of the things that I noticed was kind of how like cosplay level and performative the people who were at the Capitol were. Like it was a lot of 1776 kind of revolution style thinking. And it does remind me of the very performative and transactional relationship that these people have with the cops, because now they hate people who were at the Capitol trying to let them in. And I remember hearing them say, "You're supposed to be on our side." And I'm wondering, like, what is that like for him to see, or like in total to see how it seems transactional and performative. And I can't think of another word besides cosplay, it almost feels like.
Well, I would point out that many of the rioters were themselves members of law enforcement and or the military. There were many active duty or retired police in that crowd who have since been arrested for their participation. And as I wrote in the piece, you know, the police union, the Fraternal Order of Police, has never denounced the Republicans who voted against the gold medals for the police who were there that day. And in fact, the union has defended some of the officers who were arrested for participating in the January 6th riot. You know, there's a quote in my piece where Mike says, you know, I've come to realize I thought I was speaking for the police, but I think that most police would actually have been on the other side of those battle lines given the choice. And that was true in fact, as well as just sort of conceptually. And as I wrote in my Twitter thread yesterday, I guess, January 6th in a lot of ways, you know, the instant commentary that day and the observations people have made about, oh, you know, this has been used on the right to excuse some of what happened is, oh, well, they were let into the Capitol. You know, the cops were giving them directions. Some of them shook their hands. And we've since found out that there was a Capitol police officer communicating with rioters after the fact. He's been arrested for obstruction because he tried to help the rioters cover up their crimes. And what I wrote in my thread was that, you know, January 6th was a test of which side the police were on, Trump's side or America's side. And not all of them made the right choice. And for the ones who did, it hasn't necessarily been easy.
Right. Molly Ball, you're a great American. It's a great piece. We're going to let you go so that you can get to your 6 o'clock. Thank you for joining us. And let's get together in person once that's allowed again in life.
Absolutely. I'm vaccinated anytime. Thanks for having me.
Take it easy. Well, on that cheerful note.
No, that was she was amazing.
Yeah, she's great.
Oh my God. Yeah, I mean, just to reiterate, it really is a very powerfully
It's a very powerfully written
really
piece.
Is.
I do not know how I missed it at the time it came out. Yeah. I was very aware of Fanone's testimony and the substance of what he said, and the piece I was not aware of until Molly issued her thread yesterday. Again, do tweet threads of past work.
Can I also just say that she hits on something that really was something that is still something that we're all grappling with, which I think that she didn't adequately answer today because I don't think she can, but the entire piece is about, which is the deep, deep, deep paradox and irony of like these people who are supposedly I think that the almost too perfect beating a police officer with a blue Lives Matter flag is just like, it is also like, it brings it, how do I put this? It is not just like poetic in kind of the presentation, right? That is like too perfect, but it also just really, really like brings all of these deeper questions in, which is like, how do people abandon an identity? How do they decide which tribe they're going to support over another? Like, how is this happening in the moment? How do crowds change that? How does the president change that? How does an authoritarian regime change that? Like all of these questions about how these things balance and what snaps a person out of like, I'm about to kill a police officer while I have a like support police officers like bumper sticker on my car, and I am a police officer, or I am ex-military, or I am whatever. It's just like a very, very rich line to plumb, and I think it fell away as we got very drawn into the politics post January 6th. But I think it was one of the most essential human stories of January 6th that I just like I'm still grappling with, and a very I don't know how we prevent this again at that level. Like that doesn't like it still doesn't make sense to me. There's still no one to blame. There's still no way that reaction makes sense. Like I don't know. Sorry, that was very moved by her piece.
But actually, the thing is, the way in which a philosopher would describe it is like moral development, but it's too crude for what's happening here. Is that there is I exactly had the same reaction you did, Kate, about like what she's describing in real time, almost not in real time, like how somebody's sense of self and who they're associating with changes. I have to say, like, and I never really would have said before today's show, like, oh yeah, sure, one of the tribes in America is law enforcement, although of course it is. But like the story about how the law enforcement is implicated in January 6th is really, as you say, stuff of bad fiction.
But it's also, I mean, you know what the analogy is that it reminds me of? It reminds me of reminds me of a person who keeps lions and is like an animal lover and like keeps lions and then is eaten by the lion, right? Or like attacked or horribly mauled or mutilated by the lion. Do they still love lions? Do they love that lion? Like, what is going on with like, what was the psychological relationship that changes with that kind of do you know, like, I just think that it's like it's a fascinating kind of like, I mean, it really is like a question of like how you engage your priors in a moment of extreme survival. And then like, I don't know. I just thought she was excellent. And this piece, Ben, I also hadn't seen it. So thank you for bringing it to our attention. Hi, Shailesh. It's nice to see you.
Hey.
Glad to see that you're back from India. Okay. How was your trip?
It was a roller coaster.
Yeah. I mean, I kind of feel like all trips to India from the US are roller coasters, like even without a pandemic. Like, it's a lot of travel.
It really felt like a video game. Like it was like we strapped jet engines to our back and like flew away from New York and US and Omicron was spiking here and flew back when it started spiking there. It was crazy. But no, it was great. It was meeting the family after years and years was great.
So okay. You had a question. We didn't get your question in, but if you want to reframe it as an observation or if you have something else, feel free.
Yeah. I mean, it doesn't have to be a question for Molly. I just think it's an interesting thing to discuss. Like, what does someone like Michael hope to accomplish at places like CNN? I mean, good for him for finding compensation for something. Like, he doesn't have his police job anymore, so glad for him. But these are not good guys. Like, none of the cable news people are good guys in this picture. Like, they're not in depth, they're not serious, they preach to a small choir, and like they're just not good people in this. So how does a principled stand, like what's a good forum to take a principled stand for anyone on any issue?
So this
is a really good question.
Look, as somebody who
Ben
was on a temporary basis, that is to say 2 years, allied myself with a cable media, a cable news organization. I think I don't want to speak for Fanone, but let me give you some of the variables that might reasonably affect somebody's decision in that regard. So number one, there is no way other than that to talk to that many people. And if I were somebody who was coming off of a searing experience like this and wanted to be able to look people in the eye and say, this was my experience, this is what I think, there is nothing like it. And so I think that is and that was actually the calculation that I made when, I felt like somebody needed to actually speak about the way federal investigations are and are not conducted, whether we should understand the Mueller investigation as a deep state revolution, what the FBI is and what a counterintelligence investigation is, how it works, what a criminal investigation, how it works. And so you say, okay, I can write this stuff in Lawfare, and on a good day, 50 or 100,000 people will read it, or I can go talk about it on MSNBC, and sometimes millions of people will see it. And so the order of magnitude issue is real, and I think it's a legitimate consideration for him. The second thing is, if you're coming out with a cop salary, the money from a place like CNN that's real money. And
I think it's real money for even not a cop salary.
Well, no, but I'm saying, I'm saying, put yourself in his shoes, right? And what are the options for somebody like that? Well, realistically, there's sort of corporate security, but this is a very powerful, and so if you have the opportunity, it won't last forever, because media contracts don't last forever. They last. This is fundamentally about star fucking, and that's what these entities do. I was a high value commodity right after I had, spoken about the things Jim Comey told me. My value declined in like rotting meat. And 2 years later,
but not like lamb prosciutto, which is
not lamb prosciutto doesn't go bad. But your value declines and 2 years later, my value was such that it was not worth it to me to continue, and so I quit. But if you have the opportunity as somebody like Michael Fanone to be used by CNN and to use CNN to talk to large numbers of people and be reasonably well compensated for it, that is it strikes me as a completely legitimate choice, and I think there's a lot to be said for it, honestly.
So Shailesh, just build a time machine, join the Capitol Police Force, be there on January 6th, get beaten with a Blue Lives Matters flag, and then you two can have a lucrative contract with CNN.
So Scott,
I know that's not what you were asking. I'm just teasing.
Scott, wrap us up. You have
wrap us up.
Point,
can you explain the FedSoc issue you want to discuss, why it's a deal and what the controversy is?
Yeah, so I'm not sure if it's a big controversy, but I just wanted to throw this out. I had a bad reaction the Federalist Society had tweeted out on January 4th, join us on Thursday, January 6th, to hear from a panel of constitutional experts discussing the Supreme Court's upcoming docket, included cases on OSHA vaccine mandate, the First Amendment, immigration tax law, Medicaid, and more. And I quote tweeted and said, everyone celebrates in their own way. But I'm just curious whether my anger about the the LOL, nothing matters, kind of just passing over this really important event in terms of fidelity to the Constitution and the importance of the rule of law. To ignore it felt to me like like the wrong thing to do. But maybe this is overreaction on my part. I was actually curious what both of you thought.
Okay.
I mean, me first or you, Ben?
Go ahead.
I mean, when I get frustrated in things like this, and I'm kind of like, this was the wrong thing to do, one of the things that I like to do is, what would they have done instead?
Right, yeah.
And so I think that, like, I actually don't know that I would have been any happier with, like, any version, besides some type of mea culpa, that the FedSoc would have offered instead. And so, and at the very, at actually the worst, I think if they had decided to acknowledge it, the way they would have done so would have been opportunistic, and to have basically used it as a way to kind of get attention for their own views and their wrong-headedness, and to leverage it into some controversial event in that capacity. So while I enjoyed your commentary and I thought it was completely correct, I also was just like, there's just no, like, what else? Like, I just didn't, like, short of everyone having a brain transplant at FedSoc, how would they have done this better? Like, and I don't think that I don't think that they would have. So,
I mean, my reaction to this, Scott, is I understand your focus on the FedSoc for professional guild-related reasons, but the FedSoc, you know, the old saying, the Supreme Court follows the election returns. The only two Republicans on the floor of the House yesterday for the commemoration, for the moment of silence, were both named Cheney.
That was fucking bonkers.
And
that was bonkers.
When
and that wasn't FedSoc. That was
the
Republican
that's the
Party.
This is the institutional position of conservatism. And so when the Republican caucus will not engage with it, the professional society that that aspires to staff these people will also not engage with it. And I think the problem is not here with the FedSoc, except if you're looking at it narrowly from a lawyer point of view. The problem is with the entire incentive structure of the conservative movement. And the fact that Dick Cheney is today the Republican elected official who Democratic members of Congress will shake hands with isn't it
completely bonkers? Isn't it, like,
it's mind-boggling.
And
right.
Yeah,
it's like, it's completely insane.
But here's the thing, Scott. If Dick Cheney wanted to come on in lieu of fun and talk about democracy, would you have him?
I have to say, I mean, I wouldn't. That's a tough call, man.
Right? But this is also the same call as being on CNN when it's full of chills, like, in a certain way. Like, do you associate yourself with someone?
No. So I absolutely would have Dick Cheney on the show,
and I would never criticize you for that. So I would say and I'm just saying, like, you know, we live in I don't know. I feel like this is almost we're retelling the Mike Fanone story right now, like the various different tribes.
But that's the point.
Are colliding.
But that's the point. The point is, when we are all experiencing the actually maybe now the good guy is Dick Cheney, and certainly his daughter has been immensely, whatever you think of her for other reasons, she's been immensely courageous over the last year and has stood for some very important things. When that is the world we live in, that the only two Republicans on the floor of the House yesterday were those two people.
Were the fucking Cheneys?
Yeah,
sorry, I'm really sorry. Like, I'm going to put the fucking in front of it because it was literally that unbelievable. Like, and they're such an iconoclastic family.
So when that's the situation, it seems to me wrong analytically to focus on the FedSoc. That would be like, that's like focusing on the Conservative Dentists Association. And I just think the problem is so much bigger than the FedSoc that it's almost like a weird lawyer fetish to be like, oh, but what's the FedSoc
Scott's audience doing? And I get it.
No, I'm not criticizing you, Scott. You asked me what I thought, and a giant comet is headed toward the Earth, and is going to has blown up all of conservatism. I don't really give a shit what the FedSoc does in that context. I care about the comet.
Yeah, in the comments, John Hawkinson has pointed out that we should call the FedSoc the Conservative Dentists Association from now on. And Scott, I anoint you as the ship poster who will make that happen. And I really hope it does.
I will say so. Despite the online, stuff that I post, it turns out that, first of all, I always speak at FedSoc when I'm invited.
So do I.
Number two, so many of the people I admire in the legal academy are FedSoc members. Yeah. And
they do the best programming on a lot of campuses. And
they also pay you, by the way. Every time I do anything related to FedSoc or law and economy.
I've never gotten paid from FedSoc.
No, they don't pay academics.
Oh, okay.
I guess I'm just kind of thinking about, I'm thinking about like George Mason and like anything law and economics. If they ask you to write a piece
that's right. Yeah,
for something,
that
it will not just be, please write a piece for our symposium for freezies. It's like, and here's $1,000 or here's $500. And it's just like, it's not a ton of, it's not like it's never worth the hours you put into it, but it is like, I don't know. It's like, it is, at least they put their money literally where their mouth is. And compensate you for your labor.
I think there is a lot to admire about the FedSoc, the ideological positions that it has not it doesn't take positions, but that it has countenanced over the last 5 years, and the behavior of some of its members are exceedingly deplorable. And its tolerance for that is really, really upsetting. That said, it is of a piece with the way the entire conservative movement has behaved.
It's a weird big tent phenomenon.
Yeah, the tent is.
That we don't we don't call it.
And if the tent is too big, what happens is the bad guys who you let in the big tent actually kick everybody else out of the tent.
Yeah.
And then you end up with a theoretically big tent that's in fact not very big.
Right, as Kate has pointed out to me many times, so I'm just going to point it back out to her. It's not that the tent has gotten bigger; it's that the tent has moved to the right.
We are going to leave it there.
That's me holding a tent pole.
The tent is creeping away. We've gone over, which we've been careful not to do of late.
A fun Tuesday, friends.
Yeah.
Even though it was very depressing, but wonderful.
You're all really great Americans, and we will be back some hours and some minutes from now. And until then, Scott?
Oh, dear. We can't have fun, but we can have excruciating identity dilemmas.
It's true. Before we go, though, I just want to say, Scott, I tweeted at you the best trolley problem joke, and I didn't get a response.
I fell asleep. So can I just say something? You're wrong. I went to sleep at 7:45. I slept 12 hours.
I went to sleep at 8. That's
I felt like I had a terrible headache as I fell asleep at 7:45. I woke up. And you will see one of the very first things I did is retweeted that because I thought it was really funny.
I'm going to check.
No,
we will be back.
This is on video. I would be foolish to lie, and as you know, I do not lie.
Yeah, I never lie. See you later, guys.
Not to me anyway. Bye, guys.
Bye.